Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, Bachelor of Social Work, BFSW. Semester I, BSW 121 Professional Social Work and its Values. Block-2 Basics of Social Work. Unit-3 Voluntary Action and Social Work in India, 3.0 Objectives. In this unit we shall discuss about the concept of voluntary action and its correlation with the profession of social work. Voluntary action is inseparable from social science and social work theories, values, ethics and practice. Social work, from its inception, has been a profession based on humanitarian philosophy, having as its basic tenet the intrinsic value of every human being. One of its main aims is the promotion of equitable social structures, which can offer people security and development, while upholding their dignity. After studying this unit you will be able to know the nature of voluntary action, factors motivating voluntary action, voluntary service in India, voluntary organizations at a glance, role of voluntary organizations in social welfare, role of social worker in voluntary action, government and voluntary action, and emerging trends in voluntary action. 3.1 Introduction. The term voluntary action refers to the initiatives undertaken by people independently towards the achievement of common goals and objectives. Lord Beveridge describes voluntary action as that action which is not directed or controlled by the state. She calls it a private enterprise for social progress. Thus, a voluntary organization or agency is one which is not initiated and governed by any external control but by its own members. Voluntary action presupposes the perception of the need of the community or a section of the society, its assessment that the need can be met, and its readiness to regard it a duty to mobilize itself to meet the need. For the healthy functioning of democracy, voluntary action of this nature is of the highest significance. It serves as a training ground for the potential leadership of the community and helps to continually broaden the concepts of social justice. Voluntary action also helps in continually focusing the attention of the members of a community on its problems and needs. It promotes the acceptance by the individual citizens of their social and civic responsibilities, and it gives them an opportunity to learn to work cooperatively. Let us now consider some of the advantages and disadvantages of voluntary action. Pioneering has been a major function of voluntary agencies that allows experimentation. Also, they have the freedom to initiate work in controversial areas. Even in our country, it was voluntary action that worked for the cause of the needy and persisted in it until the statutory agencies were established to undertake the particular services. Another important aspect is the relative degree of freedom from particular political trends, something which is not available for statutory organizations. Voluntary action is also found to be more flexible and free from bureaucratic rigidity. It also has the advantage of ensuring public cooperation. The operational costs of such agencies are minimal due to the fact that the volunteers do the greater proportion of work. Probably the most common limitation arises out of the limited resources that voluntary agencies have at their disposal. The sporadic character of voluntary action leads to instability. Financially, the private agencies are not sound as they depend on the public contribution, state grants and assistance. Social workers engaged in voluntary agencies are paid low in most cases in India. 3.2 Conceptual clarity between voluntary action and social work. The term voluntary action is generally used for that action which is concerned primarily with what the individual should do, independent of the state. Definition of voluntary action. According to Lord Beveridge, the term voluntary action as used here means private action, that is to say, action not under the directions of any authority wielding the power of the state. However, as viewed above, the scope of voluntary action becomes very wide, and therefore, she confines its limit to that action which is for a public purpose for social advancement. Its theme is voluntary action outside one's home for improving the conditions of life for him, her and for her fellows. It is independent of public control. This is private enterprise, not in business, but in the service of mankind, not for gain but under the influence of a social conscience. Nature of voluntary action. As regards a voluntary worker, Lord Beveridge points out that a voluntary worker is someone who gave unpaid service to a good cause, and the group, which was formed to run this good cause, came to be known as a voluntary organization. She further adds that in recent years there has been a significant shift of meaning in these concepts. Nowadays, many of the most active voluntary organizations are staffed entirely by highly trained and fairly well-paid professional workers. The distinctively voluntary character of such bodies is the product not of the kind of workers they employ but of the manner of their origin and method of government. Social work and voluntary action. Social work has also ensured the protection of human rights through various social legislations. This enhances the happiness of the entire community by protecting from injustice and by punishing those who do not conform to the social interest. Besides, social legislations tackle social problems like untouchability, child marriage, the dowry system, sati, the Devadasi system, and various other social problems, thus helping to build a wholesome community. The emerging new notion of social service as a force and instrument in the promotion of planned social change and development enlarges the scope of professional social work activity, which traditionally has been associated with such fields of practice as child and family welfare, medical and psychiatric social work, school social work, correctional and group services. Social work has also taken up new responsibilities by tying up with other disciplines to fight poverty and the problems of modern society. Voluntary organization. A voluntary organization, properly speaking, is an organization which, whether its workers are paid or unpaid, is initiated and governed by its own members without external control. The independence of voluntary action does not, however, mean a lack of cooperation between it and public action. But the term voluntary action means that the agency undertaking it has a will and a life of its own. As defined by the National Council of Social Service, a voluntary social service is interpreted generally as the organization and activities of a self-governing body of people who have joined together voluntarily to study or act for betterment of the community. Social workers and people. Social workers work with clients at various levels: the micro level of individual and family, the meso level of community, and the macro level of national and international community. Concern for human rights must be manifested by social workers at all levels. At all times, social work is concerned with the protection of individual and group needs. It is often forced to mediate between the people and the state and other authorities, to champion particular causes and to provide support when state action threatens or neglects the right and freedom to individuals and/or groups. More than other professionals, social work educators and practitioners are conscious that their concerns are closely linked with respect for human rights. They accept the premise that human rights and fundamental freedoms are indivisible, and the full realization of civil and political rights are impossible without enjoyment of economic, social, and cultural rights. 3.3 Areas of interventions and implications of voluntary action. Here we shall discuss the intervention and implications of voluntary action by understanding the factors that motivate voluntary action, the present scenario of voluntary organizations and their objectives, and voluntary services in the Indian context. Factors motivating voluntary action. The factors that motivate people to take voluntary action or the sources of voluntarism may be identified as religion, government, business, philanthropy, and mutual aid. The missionary zeal of religious organizations, the commitment of government for public interest, the profit-making urge in business, the altruism of the social superiors, and the motive of self-help among fellowmen are also reflected in voluntarism. Burdion and William Beveridge viewed mutual aid and philanthropy as two main sources from which voluntary social service organizations would have developed. They spring from the individual and social conscience respectively. The other factors may be personal interest, seeking benefits such as experience, recognition, knowledge and prestige, commitment to certain values, etc. Further, a variety of impulses are responsible for the formation of voluntary associations with the purpose of serving their fellowmen or the unfortunate lot of society. Voluntary organizations are strong agents of political socialization in a democracy. and educate their members about social norms and values and help combat loneliness. Psychological impulses lead people to join voluntary action for security, self-expression and for satisfaction of interests. Thus, the psychological joining motivation for voluntary association is a complex phenomenon. It may vary from one individual to another and one group of individuals to another depending upon their culture, social milieu and political environment. Voluntary organizations at a glance. By and large, voluntary action is generated through social, religious and cultural organizations. This is made possible by organizations appealing to people for help. But this does not mean that volunteers always work through or in a particular organization. The sphere of social service is still very largely the domain of voluntary workers and voluntary organizations. No complete or reliable data is available about the total number of voluntary organizations in the country, as many of them are not receiving government aid and are working with their own resources. Some of these are all India organizations concerned with a wide range of activities, others are state or district level organizations. At present in India, quite a large number of non-governmental organizations, NGOs, are working for various causes. They help groups and individuals with diverse political and other interests, contribute to the strengthening of a feeling of national solidarity and promote the participative character of democracy. They have a role to play not only in areas which are accepted as state responsibilities, they can also venture into new fields, work in new areas, unveil social evils and give attention to any unattended or unmet needs. Many of the NGOs act as a stabilizing force by welding together people into groups that are not politically motivated and are not concerned about the fortunes of any political party or in capturing political power, but are above party politics and are interested in other areas of nation building and thus contribute to national integration and a focus on non-political issues. Caritas India, NBA, voluntary organizations working for women and children, etc., are few examples of such agencies fighting for human rights. There are also government-organized NGOs such as Mahila Mandal, youth clubs, cooperative societies, National Service Scheme, Nehru Yuva Kendras and government-sponsored organizations in the form of trusts set up in the name of deceased leaders, for example, the Kasturba Gandhi Trust, Gandhi Smarak Nidhi, Nehru and Kamla Nehru Trust, Indira Gandhi Trust, and the recent Rajiv Gandhi Foundation. There are several examples of the Indian NGOs protesting against certain development projects and successfully stopping them. The Chipko movement in the Himalayas, the Appiko movement in Karnataka, West Ghat and Save Silent Valley movement in Kerala, the Narmada Bachao Andolan, etc., are excellent examples of this kind. There are several places where there is environmental degradation as a result of industrial activity, and there are a number of organizations working on this task. These NGOs face a lot of difficulties as most of them are working individually. Thus, there is a need to activate the existing environmental groups at each district headquarters and set up a federation of these NGOs at the state or regional level so as to create a collective consciousness and fight jointly for a common cause. The Environment Society of Chandigarh, a regional GO, has been able to activate the few existing groups and has been instrumental in setting up several such societies in Punjab, Haryana, Himachal Pradesh and Jammu and Kashmir. Thus, with the involvement of more and more NGOs, the collective action will help the efforts to harmonize environmental and developmental issues. To a great extent, objectives of voluntary organizations. The following are the main objectives for which various organizations are working: protection and development of children, welfare of women in the rural areas, services for youth, community welfare, promotion of educational facilities, promotion of public conscience on social problems, promotion of moral standards and family welfare, prevention of disease, health care, etc., protection and welfare of the handicapped, eradication of social handicaps for certain groups, spiritual upliftment, promotion of international brotherhood, promotion of natural interests through voluntary effort, training of workers for field work, protection of nature, animals, etc. Voluntary services in India. It is generally claimed that, like our culture, Indian voluntary institutions were known in ancient India. The history and development of social welfare in India is primarily the history of voluntary action. The roots of this can be traced to the nature, social milieu and ethos of Indian people who believe in acts of the charity of various kinds. Voluntary services, pre-19th century. In the pre-19th century, it was mainly during the emergencies such as famine, flood, etc., that giving on a large scale as voluntary action took place outside the religious channels, according to Dr. P.V. Kane. The Chinese traveler Wei Sang observes the Indian people voluntarily planted trees to give shade to the weary travelers, and, in groups, dug tanks and wells for the community. In medieval India, communities organized educational institutions, boardings, libraries for students, by collecting funds and distributed grants to hospitals, colleges and poor homes. Late in the 16th and 17th century, severe famine resulted in large-scale poverty and the kings responded generously, but there was no insurgency. Throughout the 18th century, poverty was dealt by traditional means, that is individual philanthropy and religious charity. Voluntary services, post-19th century. In the 19th century there were three directions in which voluntary services were manifested. These were area of religious and spiritual tenets, religious reforms. Area of customary practices, social and ritualistic social reforms. Area of new problems and needs that demanded a solution as a result of urbanization of voluntary social work. In the latter part of the century, enlightened religious and social leaders organized voluntary movements such as Arya Samaj, Ramakrishna Mission, Theosophical Movement and Anjuman Himayat-i-Islam. Voluntary action got a boost in the early 20th century when it organized itself through a formal organization and structure in the form of registered societies, with Mahatma Gandhi in the political realm fighting against the Britishers for the emancipation of the motherland as well as for reforms in socio-economic areas. Voluntary action gained unprecedented momentum. Gandhi reinforced voluntarism in the life by decentralization of political authority and the empowerment of Gram Panchayats, which were to be completely independent of the central government. For him, voluntarism was the key to the reconstruction of India's economic and political organization. During the last 20 years, a large number of voluntary agencies have come up in India. It is estimated that in addition to those which existed in the pre-independence period, the number of such agencies would run to around 20,000, spread through the length and breadth of the country. But mostly these organizations are located and functioning in the urban areas. However, it is difficult to number the voluntary agencies and to classify them into groups based on their objectives. In the post-independence period, due to the breakdown of traditional institutions, the spread of education, social reforms, inadequacy of welfare services to the needy, rehabilitation problems, minority problems, the welfare of SC, ST, OBC etc., a phenomenal rise in the number of voluntary organizations is observed. Voluntary services in the present century. India appears to be at the threshold of effecting speedy basic socio-economic changes for the betterment of its people in the new millennium. Not only is there a need to strengthen existing democratic elements and processes, natural and social resources need to be harnessed sooner rather than later to produce more wealth and contribute to social welfare. It is imperative that the tradition of voluntary action developed during the last 200 years be further analyzed in order to provide guidelines for further action. This is necessary to cleanse the national climate for constructive and productive voluntary action. There are always new horizons opening before voluntary action. In order to deal with the complex conditions of modern life, there is far wider scope for collective action, both statutory and voluntary. Voluntary action is experimental, flexible, and progressive. It can adjust more easily than the statutory authority with its machinery and methods to deal with changing conditions and with the diversity of cases. This capacity for experiment, for trial and error, is one of the most valuable qualities in community life. Voluntary actions have not only pioneered the way for state action, but when a service has been taken over by a statutory authority, in many cases voluntary agencies continue to provide a valuable supplementary agency with the help and the full consent and cooperation of the statutory authority. The 20th century gives abundant evidence of this in the fields of education, public health, and moral welfare, and in the many spheres of social assistance where personal attention and good casework are essential. 3.4 Relevance of voluntary action in social work. The contribution made by the professional social worker in the planning and development of welfare services has been quite considerable at the center and in the states. The emergence of the professional group has of course raised all the usual problems of the relationship between the professional and non-professional. The situation is further complicated by the fact that the non-professional is not only non-socialized in professional values and skills, but is usually a person who, since she does not derive her livelihood from this vocation, considers herself to be the professional superior in status. The contribution of the professional social worker in the non-governmental sector is limited. The salaries available in the non-governmental sector do not attract the best persons in the field, and besides, in this period of transition, it is difficult for the professional to function with any decisiveness without seeming to take over the functions of the volunteer, executive, professional social worker and voluntary social worker. A professional social worker, however well equipped, cannot be a substitute for the lay leader. The former are equipped with knowledge and skills to handle problems of institutional management and interpersonal and intergroup relations. At worst, they are people doing a job only to earn a living. At best, they are persons with a sense of pride in their profession and social purpose. Being paid for their work, they are in a position to efficiently do a job that a community feels a need for, but they cannot easily move a community to accept wholly new ideas which affect its value system. They cannot in this sense become pioneers and leaders of movements. They cannot acquire the moral right to preach or to admonish a group. However, both the professional and the voluntary social worker have something specific to contribute to social work. The volunteer brings to social work the interest and confidence of the community. A social worker is an institution which promotes a full and effective functioning of the other institutions of society. The role of the social worker is to achieve this goal using her skills and knowledge. This implies a total acceptance from the worker of the client or community and a suspension of moral judgment on the part of the worker, a genuine concern for the well-being of the client or community, and the willingness to offer such professional assistance as she is capable of. This professional assistance may consist at times of material help, but in a more important way this assistance is directed at the ability of the community to develop and utilize its own resources. The object of professional service is not only relief but also rehabilitation. Thus, the social worker emerges as a separate functionary who is specialized in her area of work. The role of a social worker in voluntary action depends upon the training she has received to be scientific in her outlook, skills, and a knowledge of human relationships. Her special contribution in this field is the discovery and the interpretation of social sciences as she is equipped to undertake this task for the benefit of the community. It is the function of the professionals to seek the volunteer's help, interest, and participation, and to enable her to find opportunities for her creative work. The professionals can also make a contribution in the formation of the social policies. Besides having discussed these issues of human rights very broadly, we can say the professional social workers can effectively protect and safeguard the human rights from violations of every kind, as they are trained personnel with a respect for human dignity, liberty, and have a humanitarian outlook. Therefore, they can have a better outlook on these human rights issues than the non-professional workers, and can thus extend their services based on their knowledge and professional skills. Role of voluntary organizations in social welfare. The development of voluntary organizations in India, in its historical perspective, has been dealt with earlier in this chapter. We will now focus on the role of voluntary organizations in social welfare and planned development. In fact, the Social and Economic Development Program, enunciated in the 14-point constructive program of Gandhiji, was used as a springboard to accelerate the process of political struggle for independence and a way to activate the underprivileged and downtrodden masses to develop themselves economically and socially on a self-help through mutual help basis. A network of voluntary agencies was created to promote different constructive programs like village industries, khadi, nai, talim, leprosy work, harijan seva, etc., with the help of thousands of selfless and dedicated workers. This was the basis of social welfare programs by the voluntary organizations in the post-independence period. The main objective of planned development is to mobilize the known as well as the hidden, material and human resources in such a way as to improve the socio-economic living conditions of the people to the maximum at a given time. In general, voluntary organizations have a role to play in the economic and industrial development of the country and also to motivate people to eliminate the evil influences of the industrialization. Though the voluntary organizations do not have much of a role to play in transport and communication, they did play an important role in the construction and maintenance on village roads. Impact of voluntary services in social welfare. Voluntary organizations play an important role in social welfare through the development of education, health, housing and providing welfare services for the weak, underprivileged and handicapped sections of the population and through efforts aimed at the social development of people in terms of a change in their physical, intellectual, emotional, social and moral composition. Social development increases people's capacity to provide and contribute in greater degrees for their own well-being as well as for the good of society. It is here that voluntary organizations have played and will have to still play an even more effective role in pushing the programs of social development forward. While voluntary organizations have traditionally worked in the field of social welfare, certain state welfare organizations have also supplemented voluntary efforts, particularly in the field of beggary, prostitution, juvenile delinquency, etc. However, in all the fields, voluntary organizations emphasize the welfare aspect, particularly because state policy focuses primarily on giving financial and legislative assistance to the state welfare organizations. Generally, the voluntary organizations render their services in all fields of social welfare. Their complexion and orientation also undergo changes with the change in time and situations. A major and successful voluntary action started by Acharya Vinoba Bhave in the form of Bhudan, Gramdan, Shramdan, Jivandan, gift of land, village, labor and life, so successfully to bring about a sort of revolution in the thinking process of people to share their assets with the less fortunate people, has lost its vigor. Voluntary organizations have taken on new roles to meet the challenges emerging in a complex society with the advancement of science and technology. The examples are the 100% literacy, which was achieved by voluntary efforts in Kerala, the services for the welfare of drug addicts, prostitutes, migrants, victims of terrorist activities, etc. In India, there are about 1,000 voluntary agencies working for environmental protection apart from those working to safeguard human rights. Mahatma Gandhi, Vinoba Bhave, Jayaprakash Narayan and many such leaders have often expressed their faith in voluntary action in social development and have been duly recognized in the official documents in the post-independence era. The Balwant Rai Mehta Committee, 1957, observed, today in the implementation of various schemes of community development, more and more emphasis is laid on non-governmental organizations and on the principle that ultimately people's own local organizations should take over the entire work. The 5th and 7th 5-year plans relied heavily on voluntary agencies for social welfare programs and assistance from the state was given to them for this task. Thus, voluntary agencies, equipped with necessary technical expertise, can be useful agencies of social and economic development. In short, voluntary organizations have played a magnificent role in providing welfare services in the past, and recognized and appreciated as it is by the public and government. They will be encouraged to assume a still more glorious role for themselves in future. It is rightly said that there is no paradise except where people work together for the welfare of all mankind, and hell is where no one even thinks of service to humanity. Voluntarism in India subscribes to and opts for the first half of this statement and proves it by undertaking various programs for the welfare of the destitute, the downtrodden, the disadvantaged and the underprivileged, and complementing the state in its effort to achieve the ideals of a welfare state. 3.5 Government and voluntary action. Though any external agents do not control voluntary action, the government has accepted it as a major means of social welfare and is providing financial assistance without directly being involved in the functioning of voluntary organizations. The Government of India has recognized that voluntary organizations are not able to carry out the welfare programs to a great extent, and moreover the government bureaucracy being rule-bound and essentially conservative, it may not be advisable to entrust development work to the bureaucracy. So, a discernible shift has come about in government thinking regarding involvement of NGOs in development. Since the sixth plan period, while the voluntary agencies have been involved in the government's welfare programs for a long time, the idea that the scope of this cooperation should be widened has been gaining ground for a few decades. In October 1982, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi wrote to all the chief ministers that consultative groups of voluntary agencies must be established at the state level. Significant for the voluntary social services is the constitution of the Central Social Welfare Board. Finally, of the greatest potential significance is the constitution of a division of social security in the central government. The problem of coordinating the activities of government and non-governmental agencies is in some ways more difficult than the problem of coordinating the activities of central and state governments. The need as well as the difficulty of coordinating government and NGOs are much greater, particularly within the field of social welfare. The Planning Commission attempts to establish a liaison between these two efforts in three ways. 1. By associating NGOs in the process of planning. 2. By entrusting some government-sponsored programs to NGOs for implementation. 3. By promoting the growth of NGOs through a program of grants in aid. There are two ways by which the government could help the existing agencies to function effectively and grow in response to changing situations. One is by offering direct help in terms of finances and equipment. Another way is in the manner in which the existing agencies may continually be associated with statutory action. Yet another important way in which the government can help the voluntary agencies is through legislation. Voluntary agencies, if they are worth the name, must be born of voluntary endeavor. However, it is possible for the government to create conditions under which people may be encouraged to organize new voluntary agencies. Emerging trends in voluntary action. So far, the discussion has focused on the theoretical aspects of voluntary action. It has now become an irrefutable fact that voluntary action is necessary for social welfare and development. Though there are scores of statutory organizations and governmental planning, in the modern times, voluntary organizations have realized new spheres of work, moving away the traditional outlook, and this has encouraged and enlarged the scope of voluntary action. At present, numbers of voluntary organizations are working in India and at the international level for the development of the nation and the people. The main areas of their work include education, health and medicines, child and women welfare, human rights issues, abolition of social evils, national integrity, international peace, etc. More recently, all the researchers of social sciences have undertaken large-scale measures to alleviate poverty and promote nutrition and self-sufficiency of material needs to all, with the help of national and international voluntary organizations and the developed, rich countries. Even India as a developing country is expected to be self-sufficient by the year 2020. The violation of human rights, particularly in the case of children, women and bonded laborers, has become a major issue. The ongoing Narmada Bachao Andolan, the forest protection movements and the feminist organizations that are working for the rights of women and for justice against their exploitation are recent example in this case. The problems of social welfare and development have become an integral concern in the process of planning and development. Many new agencies and institutions have come into existence. In many parts of the country, there have been numerous innovative social efforts through the initiative of voluntary organizations and voluntary leaders as well as public agencies. In every field, every earlier assumptions are being questioned and the gaps in policy and implementation have come to be identified more precisely. Social challenges, especially the insecurity of the minorities and the international peace problem, are looming larger than before. The texture has become increasingly complex and every aspect of social welfare takes on a multidisciplinary dimension. 3.6 Summary. From this discussion, we know that voluntary action is a process of carrying out the implementation of activities towards the achievement of common goals and objectives. Therefore, voluntary actions need to be adapted to the changing scenario and in fact, voluntary organizations are changing their outlook and mode of functioning. Today, voluntary action is not a mere charity but a profession as far as the workers are concerned, as they are being paid handsomely. Nowadays, many of the most active voluntary organizations are staffed entirely by highly trained and also fairly well-paid professional workers. We have seen in the earlier part of this unit that voluntary action emerged up in the areas of education and social security in the form of societies, homes for the destitute, the disabled, etc. Though some of these functions have been taken up by the state because of their heavy financial responsibility and other reasons. New needs have come up with industrialization and urbanization, and some of these can be best met for certain reasons by the voluntary organizations. In fact, with the development of the concept of the welfare state, the state will seek to do more for the citizens in the future than it did in the past, whatever may be the political color of the government. The future of voluntary action must be considered in the light of the above conclusion. With the development of science and technology, in this computer era, the internet is becoming the ideal medium of communication, as it is much faster, cost-effective and environment-friendly. It is now accepted by all concerned that voluntary organizations are more successful in reaching out to the poor and in poverty alleviation due to their being small, flexible, innovative, participatory, and cost-effective in their style of functioning. Voluntary organizations in India, going by the number of registrations in all the states and the union territories, exceed 1 million in number and are increasingly getting aware of the potential of the internet. A survey in 1998 by CAP covering 4,508 prominent voluntary organizations revealed that 3.5% of all respondents had already developed their websites. The web presents new potential for working, information sharing and resource opportunities for voluntary organizations. The information superhighway can prove to be the new path to self-sufficiency for voluntary organizations in the fields of health, development and welfare. It is hoped that voluntary organizations and charities involved in implementation of socio-economic development programs would use and fully harness the convenience and speed of the internet and information technology to help the poor and thereby accelerate the pace of socio-economic development in India. Thank you for watching. We will see you in the next video with the next chapter.